Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for coming. I'm Kathy Edersheim, class of 1987, and I am pleased to welcome you to the Yale Club of New York City for this momentous event. I was also the first president of the Yale Club, and I am honored to serve as your MC for this celebration of the unveiling of the portrait of Yale University's first woman president, Hanna Holborn Gray. We are thrilled that President Gray is here with us this evening, and we all want to thank her very much and recognize her presence here. We're also thrilled that Yale University's current president, Maurie McInnis, is here this evening as well. While you will hear about President Gray's extraordinary academic career from our speakers this evening, I invite you to take a moment and take as a memento the portrait card listing her key accomplishments, which will be distributed following the program. On behalf of the Women's Task Force and the club, we're proud to say that this is the fourth portrait of an illustrious Yale woman to be commissioned by the club. The project began in conjunction with the university's celebration of the 50th anniversary of women as Yale undergraduates and the 150th anniversary of women at the graduate school. We hosted a gala honoring Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor in February of 2020, days before the pandemic temporarily closed down the clubhouse. The club subsequently celebrated portrait unveilings for Dr. Pauli Murray in June of 2022 and of Dr. Grace Hopper in November of 2022. And we're looking forward to more images of women in the club in the years to come. I'd like to recognize the club's Women's Task Force for leading this ongoing effort. And it's now my pleasure to call to the podium Yale Club's current president, Sunny Chu, class of 1997.
Good afternoon, everybody. I wanted to, first of all, thank all of you for joining us on this occasion. You can hear me, right? Thank you for making the time to celebrate what is going to be an excellent addition to our art collection. Good. All right. I also wanted to thank, obviously, all the special guests and dignitaries in the building, particularly, obviously, President McInnis from the university. And I also wanted to welcome Allison Cole, who is the executive director of the Yale Alumni Association, who the club has been working very closely with, and I feel like we've made some excellent progress. So thank you for also coming down for everything you're doing with us, and I'm very much looking forward to the road ahead. So it brings me great joy to actually be able to introduce President Maurie McInnis this afternoon. President McInnis is the 24th president of the university, a role that she assumed officially on July 1st, 2024, although I think the celebration was a little bit afterwards. She is a professor in the Department of Art History and has spent 3 decades in higher education, holding a range of teaching, research, and leadership positions at a number of prominent universities. In her most recent role, she was the 6th president at Stony Brook University, which is one of the flagship universities in the state of New York. And as the chief executive, she also oversaw Stony Brook Medicine, which encompasses 5 health sciences schools, 4 hospitals, and over 200 community-based healthcare settings. President McInnis was also a key player in managing nearby Brookhaven National Laboratory, which is a U.S. Department of Energy facility. Is it still one? Thankfully. She is also the inaugural chair of the board of New York Climate Exchange, and she started her journey at the University of Virginia and carried on further at the university where she pursued graduate studies at the Department of History. So you have the rare honor of being a member of UVA or being a member of the Yale Club straight on. So we won't ask you what you'll decide today, but I know that the UVA our UVA members throw a better party, or, or a louder party. Yeah. President McInnis has authored 5 books, including an award-winning title, and contributed to numerous exhibitions and archival projects. After completing graduate studies, she served on the faculty at James Madison University and then returned to UVA, holding various leadership roles and strengthening academic connections. Following time at UVA, she served as the Provost and Executive Vice President at the University of Texas at Austin, where she focused on expanding access to higher education, which I think was timely then and is timely now. So in addition to her academic and administrative roles, President McInnis has served on various boards and commissions, including the Association of Public and Land Grant Universities, Commission on Economic and Community Engagement, as well as the Association of American Universities. So I think I've gone on just enough. I want to thank you all again, and now I'd like to welcome President McInnis to deliver some remarks. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. What a delight to have you all here for this great occasion. Sunny, thank you so much for your partnership. We really look forward to deepening our connections. So, it is difficult to describe how special and wonderful it is for me, the second woman president at Yale and number 24, to have the pleasure and honor of speaking at the portrait dedication of the Provost and first woman president of Yale, number 18, and who later served as the first woman president at the University of Chicago. President Gray and I do not know each other. We've only just gotten to meet this evening. Yet I owe her so much, and it is moving to me to be able to pay tribute to her. I could spend my few minutes here elaborating on how she was a trailblazer in so many ways. In addition to her history-making leadership roles, she is the first woman tutor in history and literature at Harvard, the first woman to enter Harvard's Signet Society, and the first woman to receive the Maurie's Cup at Yale. Or I could spend my time elaborating on how she has made it more natural for women like me, in her very own words, to chair a meeting, read a balance sheet, raise money, go toe-to-toe in a conversation, and occasionally, like any human being, raise my voice like any ordinary leader and yet not be considered a harridan. I could elaborate on the courage and firmness it took to help lead Yale with galvanizing personalities at a moment when so much was going on at the university, but there was little money and Yale was under siege from many directions. I could elaborate extensively on all of that, but I'm not going to do that because this is an important moment for our universities and our nation. And at this moment, I wish to focus on how pleased I am that President Gray's portrait will hang at the Yale Club, because she has embodied and fought for the very best of what universities are and should stand for. President Gray never aspired to be, as she has described it, a president of one of those places that tries to make a difference in every important good. Trying to do that, she has suggested, diverts from the long-term contributions that are specifically universities to make. She always worked to be a leader who places overall importance on the life of the mind. She has been an advocate for the kind of liberal arts education that opens the imagination, cultivates a broad understanding of the world, develops an appreciation for education as a valuable end in itself. At Yale and at Chicago, she did all the things that a leader must do, the hard things and the things that really are a privilege and a joy as well. She hired, raised money, traveled, figured out how to handle a large board, attended many events, helped decide on how campus would expand, dealt with emergencies and tragedies, played a role as a pastoral counselor, and she kept her sense of humor while doing it. If you read her book, An Academic Life, you will not only learn, but you will also laugh. Despite all this, it was always clear that President Gray's true focus was on what truly matters: making space for debate on hard questions, affirming academic freedom, hiring the greatest professors in their fields, and advancing the educational values she learned as a child from her parents. Her father was a distinguished Yale professor of history, from other Yale faculty who were her parents' friends, and from her own teachers in New Haven, at Bryn Mawr, and at Harvard. She made sure that those values endured. And we are proud that while the University of Chicago may be her primary home, Yale will always be a home of hers as well. She grew up within the Yale community. She was called on to work for, develop, and defend the university, and became embedded in a world that will always be a part of her. I am so honored to follow her as a president, to carry forward her values, and to be among those celebrating her today as the Yale Club dedicates her portrait. Thank you.
Thank you again, President McInnis. A lovely tribute. Our next speaker is the portrait artist, Maurie Chen. She's the award-winning painter of the wonderful portrait we will see shortly. Ms. Chen studied the sciences in her native Shanghai before returning to art. Her distinctive style is a dynamic combination of realism and impressionism that reflects both Western approaches and Chinese traditions. This is the second portrait that Ms. Chen has executed for the club. She also painted the portrait of Admiral Grace Hopper, which is around the corner from this room. Ms. Chen.
Good evening, everyone. Capturing a person on canvas has been my passion. For me, a portrait is more than just a visual likeness. It's like a bridge between the artist, the sitter, and the viewer. My hope is that each painting creates a quiet, lasting conversation among all of us. So when I was commissioned to paint Hanna Gray, I felt incredibly honored and excited. I was especially happy to find out she lives just 15 minutes away from me. So naturally, I imagined being able to paint her from life, across like multiple sessions, which is the way I like to work. Then came the twist. The portraits was represent Hanna during her time as President of Yale several decades ago. So that changed everything. So I realized that wouldn't be a straightforward process. I couldn't simply just paint when she sits in front of me. I had to reach back in time. I had a chance to visit Hanna a couple times. These visits were invaluable, actually. I couldn't pin her directly at the time, but I got a strong sense of her and her spirit, her energy. So all of that stayed with me while I was painting her. I think of her. So I also had some wonderful friends who stepped in as a model for me during the process. One of them even helped to find out a period of appropriate clothing, and they modeled for me in that clothing. I'm so grateful for their help. Eventually, I arrived at pose the most of it kind of happy with. Then the hardest part was the face, the likeness. So most photo reference I had were small black white photos. And I went through quite a different version, especially the hair of Hanna's head, the color. So I couldn't really tell from the photos. So we went back and forth with Hanna, sending pictures to her. And she was incredibly generous with her time and her feedback. Her feedback is always very, very quick, because sometimes I have clients holding for a long time to give me feedbacks. She always gives me quick feedbacks. I really appreciate it. And she always very straightforward and honest. So I know what to fix. I hope I have captured her likeness. And, when the time she was, right, 40 or 50 years ago. So it's a historical time. So I sincerely hope the portraits reflect not only how Hanna looked, also the strength, the grace, the intelligence she brought to her role and continue to bring to the world today. So this project has been intriguing, challenging, and incredibly meaningful to me. I want to especially thank Hanna for her great patience and the Yale Club for their trust and support. And I want to say thanks to Ann Neaton for giving me this amazing opportunity. Thank you all.
I'm now honored to introduce Henry Sam Chauncey Jr. Professor Chauncey spent 22 years working in the Yale administration as an assistant dean of Yale College, as a special assistant to President Kingman Brewster Jr., class of 41, and as secretary of the university, among other positions. Professor Chauncey and the late Elga Wasserman, 76 JD, were the two people assigned to implement coeducation in Yale College in 1969. Professor Chauncey and President Gray were valued colleagues and remain great friends. Professor Chauncey will come to the podium and introduce President Gray for us.
It's my privilege to introduce someone who I've known for a long time. In doing so, I am not going to list her honors and awards and directorships. I think you're actually going to get a piece of paper that will tell you all about that. I'm rather going to, without trying to compete with the artist, I'm going to paint sort of a portrait, a verbal portrait of Hanna, by just telling you about a few things, which I hope will be helpful, and you can leave saying, I really know her. As you were told, Hanna Gray's father, Hanna Holborn, a distinguished historian of modern Germany, was forced from his professorship at the University of Berlin by the Nazi regime, and he brought his family to Yale. Hanna grew up in New Haven, graduated from Bryn Mawr College, got her PhD at Harvard, and at Harvard she met her wonderful and wise husband, Charles Gray. Hanna came from a long line of scholars, and the academic world is in her very being. It's been the major part of her life, and I commend to you her autobiography, An Academic Life. Hanna didn't set out to be a leader of women or lead women's causes. In her book, she speaks of her inauguration as president of the University of Chicago and being introduced not as the first woman president of Chicago or some other university, but as the first foreign-born president of Chicago. I think she was very comfortable with that, and she liked it. When she was inaugurated, it was in the wonderful Gothic chapel of the University of Chicago, the Rockefeller Chapel. And it's a fine building, and you need to know that it has stone floors. She spoke from the pulpit and abided by the university regulation that faculty members are only allowed to speak at a university event for 11 minutes. She got a lot into those 11 minutes, and to the dismay of the audience, but not Hanna, about 5 minutes into her talk, a postman opened the front door, and with his steel-tipped shoes, he walked the length of the Rockefeller Chapel, slowly. He looked up at Hanna and said, "Excuse me, ma'am," and went into the offices below. She never missed a beat. She had an 11-minute bogey. When Hanna became provost, Kingman had been president for 10 years. The university, frankly, had real problems with the budget. And Hanna had an extraordinary ability to work not only with Kingman on the one hand, the faculty, and faculty are always unhappy when the budget is being cut, and the concerned trustees. But she has an enormous understanding of how to listen, make judgments, and keep different constituencies happy. Hanna brought her clear thinking to the board of Cummins Engine Corporation, the maker of diesel engines. Now, why would Hanna Gray want to have to deal with diesel engines? She joined that board because the CEO and chairman was J. Irwin Miller. And Irwin was best known, I think, as a patron of 20th century architecture and what he did in Columbus, Indiana. He was also a very innovative leader in labor union issues, something that Yale people need to learn about at that time. Irwin told me that Hanna was his best director. She has a spine of steel. During her presidency at Yale, she used those skills that she'd learned from Irwin. One evening I was at Hanna's home and we were discussing a very serious strike which had gone on for months. And during a conversation, the phone rang, and it was the governor, Ella Grasso. Now, Ella was known for her strong language, including a wide variety of four-letter words. And she used those words, telling Hanna that this was a bad time because it was an election year. Hanna listened carefully, and in a few well-chosen words, firmly suggested that the governor mind her own business. And she hung up. Hanna and Charles loved Vermont, where they had a home. They also loved the Marlborough Chamber Music Festival, which Hanna is still involved with. But it was the home in a small town in northeast kingdom of the state, which was the real haven for them when they had a chance to get away from Chicago. Picture an old farmhouse on a dirt road, surrounded by original stone walls, a nearby pond and trails that went off into the woods, reminding one of the road not taken. and a view for miles across the hayfields to the mountains beyond. The Grays did not tear the house apart, and they were careful to see to it that it remained really the way it had always been. And the beauty of it was the simplicity and really, in a sense, the respect for history, which was demonstrated by the house. And we had a meal often together, the three of us, in the kitchen, and it was our favorite meal. A beer, hot dogs, potato salad, and ice cream. A very, very simple way of living. So I introduce you to a person who speaks clearly, listens carefully, has empathy when appropriate, and can be very strong when necessary. She has been a wonderful leader in the academic world, and she has been a dear friend. Hanna Gray.
Hello. I am very glad to be here for many reasons, and very glad you're here. And thank you for coming, and thank you for the generosity of your presence. I thank President McInnis for coming, and it is wonderful to meet her. I have met many Yale presidents. The first one I met, I was 4 years old, 91 years ago. And in 1934, my father had joined the Yale faculty. And one Sunday, and we moved to Hamden, Connecticut, to Spring Glen. I still remember the street, 33 Harmon Street, a little house. And one Sunday afternoon, a car drove up, and out stepped Mr. and Mrs. Angel, President and Mrs. Angel. And they came for tea, and I have to say I can't remember the conversation. I cannot remember the conversation. But I was very impressed, because I was told this was the President of Yale, and as a consequence, my mother had baked a special tea cake. And that was what made it such an impressive afternoon. Well, President Angel was an important president. He was the only Yale president without a Yale degree, other than me. And he was a president for a great deal longer, I should say. And he was the person who actually, I think, began the real process of Yale becoming a university, as opposed to a college that was in some ways a university. And that was an important role that he played. And interestingly, he came from the University of Chicago. His scholarly career, he was a social psychologist, had been led pretty much at the University of Chicago, where he had presided over the social sciences as a dean and then become academic vice president. And he was academic vice president and acting president of the University of Chicago when his predecessor, who had become a do-nothing president, again did nothing, which was he didn't resign. And so Mr. Angel went to the University of Michigan, and from there to Yale. And then some 40 years later, he recommended a Yale graduate who had been secretary of the university at the age of 25. At the same time that he was secretary of the university, Sam, he went to law school and got his degree. And in 1937, he became a full professor of law. A year later, he became dean of the law school. And a year after that, he was elected at the age of 29 to the presidency of the University of Chicago. Now, it was also the case that there was an earlier exile from Yale, William Rainey Harper, who was the founder of the University of Chicago. And not only was he extremely important in the future of higher education more generally, not to mention the University of Chicago, but he took with him, he robbed Yale of the famous coach Amos Alonzo Stagg. Now I see you all looking a little surprised. You don't think of us as a powerhouse, a football powerhouse. And you don't understand. The University of Chicago was one of the founders of the Big Ten. The University of Chicago was the champion of the Big Ten until roughly the middle of the First World War. Then came Mr. Hutchins. Mr. Hutchins believed that American education, higher education, and he developed these views fully in a bestseller called The Higher Learning in America, in which he said everything was wrong with American higher education. It was materialistic. It was corrupt. It was basically just a kind of corrupt networking playground for playboys. It did nothing to actually educate anybody's mind, and all it did was to try to prepare them for social status and for the mindless life of the bourgeoisie of America. He was a man who made his audiences sit up. They really did sit up when he spoke, because he was also very witty. And for example, on a wonderful day, which must have been the greatest day of his life, when the University of Chicago lost to the University of Michigan on the football field by a score of 87-0. His heart leapt up because he considered intercollegiate sports to be the worst symptom of everything that was wrong with higher education. The people didn't care about really educating people, and that this was the worst form of corruption, calling something like that education. He raced to the telephone and announced that Chicago was leaving the Big Ten. Well, it was a scandal, and many people were appalled by this. And what was interesting was that the University of Chicago had had the first Heisman Trophy winner. Yale had the second, but the University of Chicago had the first. And the first Chicago Heisman Trophy winner gave it to his aunt to use as a doorstep. And it was ultimately rescued from her legacy and given to the university, which does have a trophy room because it has a lot of trophies. They're very old, but they are real trophies. And as a consequence, you may not realize this about my biography, Sam, which you seem to have culled pretty well, but I have received the Heisman Trophy. Now, the reason for that is that in giving it to the university, I was the receptor. So I took from his hands his newly polished up, because his aunt's doorstep stopper was kind of dirty. I took from his hands and therefore received the Heisman Trophy. Thank you. Thank you very much. So, in a certain way, Hutchins went on competing with Yale. William Rainey Harper competed with Yale in the sense that where Yale was basically a collegiate institution in his view, Chicago should be a basically research university. Hutchins competed with his alma mater by, in a sense, condemning all colleges like Yale, and by saying that what was needed was a total transformation of higher education in America, and that would take place through the great general education program that he set out. He was always controversial. He was a great champion of academic freedom. He was, in fact, a constitutional lawyer who had, to my mind, some really crazy ideas about education. I mean, we honor Mr. Hutchins always, but, and he had an enormous influence. He actually did provoke a debate about education in America that was overdue, interesting, and always controversial. And in an interesting way, he and Kingman Brewster became friends. Hutchins actually hoped that Kingman would succeed him as the president of the Center for Study of Democratic Institutions, which was a sort of martini-drinking institute in a nice sort of estate in Santa Barbara, California, where people sat around drinking martinis and thinking about how to improve the Constitution of the United States. And unfortunately, they never did that. But they talked about it quite a lot. Now, I think that these kinds of relationships I mentioned, both because there are very close relations between our two universities, but even more than that, because universities of Yale's kind and of the University of Chicago's kind are a community of common purpose, a community of institutions that share one of the most important purposes that we know. And they are institutions which depend above all on the institution, always vulnerable and often challenged, of academic freedom. A freedom, a form of intellectual liberty that is often misunderstood as though it was the same thing as free speech. Free speech is also important. But free speech means you can say any dumb thing you feel like, and the Constitution protects you. You can say any stupid thing. You cannot do that under the category of academic freedom. Academic freedom involves the responsibility to have investigated with great care, to have evidence that is good, arguable evidence, and to be willing to share, to be open about the conclusions that one reaches, how one has reached it, and even to change one's mind if one finds that there has been some reason for doing so. And so, as a citizen, you can say any damn thing you please. As a professor, you have to know what you're talking about, and you have to subscribe to what is in many ways an unwritten contract, but a very important contract that says the most important thing in this world has to do with the life of the mind and with integrity. Integrity in the way in which you use it, integrity in the way in which you present it, integrity in the sense that you are serving not a sectarian purpose, a personal interest, a party platform, or anything of that kind, but you are serving in something that is very precious and, again, very vulnerable as it proceeds, and that is the search for knowledge and the search for truth, which is, of course, the greatest of human endeavors in many ways, and the one with the most impact on the world and its ways and how it operates, and whether it is a good world that one knows. And it is secondly, of course, always, for that entire community of universities, important if one fails or one is challenged on issues of academic freedom or other issues, it is important that others pay attention because it is their world as well. That is so on the one hand, and on the other, we have a universe of such different institutions, institutions with different DNA, institutions that have their own special traditions, their own special strengths, their own special conception of what makes them so special. And that can lead to, and has led in American history, I think, to a very good kind of competition in which different institutions have different strengths and build on them. It can also lead to a very destructive form of competition, as it too often does today, when it becomes a competition for attracting more students than the next guy, particularly at a time when the number of applicants for college, which is, of course, a tremendous problem for the coming years, but has already been a tremendous problem in past years. And that's reflected particularly as you see the closing of small liberal arts colleges all over the country. And of course, we'll be seeing more. But it's also a problem for universities, and universities increasingly have become like consumer institutions, which are wanting to please the consumer and wanting to attract the consumer. And to see that turn in that community of universities, to see them compete for the wrong reasons, each of them boasting that it has more applicants than anybody else, and it's fewer of them. What a terrible thing to say to our 18-year-olds, a really dreadful thing to say to our 18-year-olds. All that goes to say that this is a time, and a difficult time, when universities were in any case facing a difficult future. Now, there's an old story, well, it's not a story, I guess, but I once read a comment by a baseball manager. He said, "I have seen the future, and the future looks just like the present, only longer." And I thought, you know, in a way, as I think about the category of university presidents, it's a good kind of description of two different kinds of presidents. There's the president who is a perfectly competent president, who looks after the present, and who knows that education is about the future, of course, but the future is going to be like the present, so taking very good care about the present is basically the task. And that can be done competently, and it can be done well. And then there's the president who says, well, the future isn't like the present, and we ought to get ahead of it. And we should plan, not be forced by the circumstances to react to what we should do in the future, but we should think about our own traditions and our own strengths and how to build on them for the future. And so we are at a very complicated time, I think, when the public appears to be showing considerable ebbing confidence in higher education. We are at a very difficult time when institutions themselves have felt that perhaps they needed to engage in some of the behaviors, like the one I mentioned, that is not really to their credit. And of course, we are at a time when our own failures and our own flaws have given a certain amount of energy to what I would call assault on higher education that is taking place in America today. I think then of, again, the presidents I have known of Yale. And when I think, by the way, of what is occurring here this afternoon, I think how life changes, how when I was actually directly associated with Yale, I probably couldn't have been in this room. And here I am in this room. And I think also of the fact that I'm going to become not just a visitor here, and I've been a wonderfully treated visitor here, I must say, but I will become a permanent resident. through this simulacrum, and I'll have very good company. I'll have very good company in that room. And the best company of all for me, because I belong to that era, is the company of Kingman Brewster. I had the best of good fortunes in working for Kingman Brewster, who I think was among a very fine group in his time, contemporary group of presidents, was the most interesting and the greatest leader. It wasn't because he was some kind of great manager. It wasn't because he was somebody who was sort of overcautious and just wanted to be sure not to get anyone mad or anything like that. He thought about the future. He belonged to that second category of presidents in a presidential quality. He was a constitutional lawyer, too, and he cared deeply, deeply about the rights and the constitutional issues that surrounded universities and how they were governed, surrounded the independence of universities and the independence of those who composed those universities to choose their curriculum, to develop their own subjects, to govern internally, and to create what the world often finds preposterous, and often is in practice preposterous, and that is what we call shared governance. Shared governance seems very inefficient to a lot of good corporate people who don't need entirely to be too collegiate in the way in which they manage their corporations. And there's a lot of preposterous stuff. You should just sit through a few faculty meetings and you'd want to reform every university you visited. I can assure you of that. You do not want to attend a faculty meeting. On the other hand, they can be sources of great inspiration as well as of great comedy, and occasionally of simple boredom, of course, as well. But shared governance, the fact that a university, in seeking knowledge and in seeking truth, is an institution whose members need to be able to talk to each other in a way that comes within the context of a shared purpose. And those who administer these institutions, the presidents, and this has been true of all the great Yale presidents, have cared more for the institution and its future, have cared more for the quality of education and investigation than they have for their so-called legacies, or than they have for private interests of various kinds, or than they have simply because they want to be secure and not get into any kind of trouble. And so this is a wonderful time, President McInnis, and I admired having had the opportunity to read your talk to the reunion class, your talk about academic freedom, which I thought was right on the mark. This is a time that people are mourning how difficult it is, but it is also a time of great opportunity, because if people can bring themselves to think about the future, to plan, to build on strengths, to be open to change, to understand that you have to tolerate dissent, to understand that you have to accept dissent, but you also have to listen to it, because you also learn from what others are thinking. And you have to be careful not to isolate yourself from the thoughts of others or to become irritated because people go on strike or people refuse to follow the policy that you think is the right policy. You cannot seek popularity, but people respect those who care about the ethics of what I would call university governance. And I think people are anxious to see that more fully restored. And I think that we will get through this time, which is a time of immense difficulty. And it's very easy to see why people are preoccupied with the present. But nonetheless, I think we will get through it better by doing what we do best and continuing to assert and to practice the values of that common purpose for all universities, while each has to find its own solution to the specific issues that it is going to be, in many ways, subject to, and those will differ for different institutions, which have different resources and different specialties, and so on and so forth. But while dealing with that, as everyone must do, and while attempting to mobilize a larger public to an understanding and active preoccupation of their own with these issues, I think that it is an opportunity to think about how we are doing and how we could do, and to think about that future, which is not going to be a longer extension of the public. Now, it seems to me that this is a good opportunity to give a new, or newish at least, President of Yale advice from a very old and sort of peculiar one, since I was a very brief one. I thought I'd give her just, a couple of pieces of advice. The first is that, it's to remember the words of the man who was asked to mow the lawn at the cemetery. And he was told, you're going to have a lot of people under you, but you're not going to be able to get them to do very much. Now, it's a good story, but it's not entirely true, because you do get to get them to do stuff, and the reason for that is that you get to work with very good people, because no president does whatever he or she does on her or his own. You need good people like Sam Chauncey, and I'll tell you a secret about him. He was in charge of Yale University. Believe me, there was nothing that happened there that didn't have his hand, that was important, that didn't have his hand in it. And there was no one who had problems that needed some attention, because there is a pastoral responsibility that university administrators have as well. And he was an excellent person in that respect as well. So you work with very good people. I had a very good, here's somebody else I worked with, Jonathan Fenton. And you have both a wonderful experience of working with people that you admire and can be friends with, but you also have the good fortune, the good luck, which I had, not just of working for Kingman and being inspired by his form of leadership and by his willingness to take risks, and at the same time, his willingness to ultimately take credit, not just for good things, but to take always on himself the onus for things that didn't work. And he always supported the people that he worked with completely. And that is a very important feature, I think, of the kind of ways in which presidents can work with other colleagues, and it makes it a lot more fun. Presidents are not meant to say that they have fun. They are meant to be extremely solemn people who are always thinking about very, very important questions, like what is the end of human life? You know, stuff like that. And actually, they are usually not philosophers of that sort, and usually they are thinking about the university 24/7, but there is a great deal of fun, which is often serious fun, because fun, after all, can be very serious. You're dealing with very interesting people, you're dealing with very interesting questions, you get to meet a lot of very interesting people, and you get to see some really very funny things that go on. Universities are funny places, they're not just serious places, and that's one of the things that is the deep charm, and one of the things that makes the successive generations of students, they're always the same age, and they always go through the same things, and it's kind of wonderful to see. People always say, gosh, this entering class is the best class we've ever had. And if that were true, everybody would be have a Nobel Prize by this time. Actually, bright students are bright students, and the best are always the best. But in many ways, I think that some of the education they're receiving is better, and some of the motivation that they have is greater. And so I don't see, over a very long lifetime, I've now been a teacher for over 75 years. And I would say in my lifetime that excellent students are excellent students, and that we should not give in to the view that everything grows all the time. The great thing is that the students who are maybe not at the top of their class are often the most interesting and rewarding students as well. But that is a digression, and I stand up here telling you all my opinions about everything. I'm going to say finally, and now you have heard the word that for any audience is the most beautiful word in the English language, finally. Finally, let me thank you all ever so much again for this really very nice occasion, and for your generosity, and for your kindness in being here. And for Yale, I would like to also express my gratitude to the university, which gave my family a home, and which gave me so many opportunities to pursue, to lead over a very long lifetime now, a wonderfully satisfying academic career. Thank you.
Why don't you stay on this side of me?
Pardon?
Oh. President Gray, thank you very much for those inspiring and hopeful remarks. We are so appreciative that you are here today with us. Let's thank her once again, if I may. I present these to you, but I will hold them for you for now.
Thank you.
Sonny and President McInnis, could you please join us for the unveiling of the portrait?
Do I turn?
Yeah, sure, turn around so you can see it.
Oh.
All right, you counting?
Probably not a surprise.
I should have said a word, or more than a word, but I should have said a whole page's full to Maurie, who painted this. And, you know, it's an extraordinary assignment
Is this on?
to paint somebody's portrait, not in person, and to paint it backwards, right? Because she had to paint me as I maybe looked 50 years ago. So when I say I don't look like that, it's because that is meant to be me 50 years ago. And so Mary, I think, deserves special applause for her patience. She was wonderfully patient in exploring how to do something like that. And she said I was patient, but she's just being polite. Really. I was not very helpful because, among other things, I don't know how I looked 50 years ago. I really don't remember all that well. On the other hand, she was always, she would email me, and she'd have another idea, and we'd have a little email conversation about that. And her patience and her persistence has been a great thing, a great gift to me, and I thank you, Mary.
Would you like a photograph of?
Do you want to see? After it. This is called before.
Does this work?
You should really
And just you now. Yes. And the two presidents, yeah.
We can do it after, too.
I feel silly.
While we have the last, another picture of the two presidents, please join me in another round of applause for President Gray, the beautiful portrait by Mary Chen, and appreciation for President McInnis joining us today for this wonderful celebration.
That's beautiful.
And you're all welcome to stay and enjoy the reception. Thank you for joining us.
I'm fine. Well done. Thank you.